Good morning, Hoyas. Good morning. I'm Mike O'Hanlon from Brookings, but also one of Keir Lieber's proud adjunct professors here at Georgetown. I'm very happy to be here today for one of the signature events of this university and its Security Studies program and School of Foreign Service. It's a real privilege to be part of this, a remarkable collaboration between Georgetown and the intelligence community, and also with participation from broader academia and the press. It really, to me, brings together one of the best concepts of vibrant public debate in the nation's capital, where we can work collaboratively, even as we take our independent roles, and even as a place like Georgetown is free, of course, to express critiques and new ideas for the government at the same time that it works closely in partnership with the government. To me, it's just a signature accomplishment and really one of a kind in terms of my experiences in American universities watching these kinds of collaborations. I don't have a lot to do today at this point except to introduce Dr. Billy Jack, who is going to frame the day a little bit more substantively. I'll have the opportunity to come up every so often and make sure you know what to do next in terms of our itinerary and our program, and have the opportunity to interact a little bit, for example, with the Honorable Jane Harman at lunchtime or right after lunch, our keynote. A couple of quick ground rules. First of all, in terms of Q&A, what we will do is when we have a panel discussion, we're going to use cards to submit questions. When we have a keynote speaker, you'll be able to come straight to a microphone. There'll be more reminders on that, as well as on the logistics of lunch and the career fair, which will follow at 3 o'clock right after the proceedings as we go through the day. So without further ado, let me thank you for coming, welcome you to this forum, and introduce Dr. Billy Jack.
Good morning, everyone. So I was at Penn Station earlier this week, catching the train back to DC. And on the side of Madison Square Garden, there's all these quotes from Taylor Swift and Billy Joel. And they all say, you know, if you perform at Madison Square Garden, there's nothing like it. Well, they haven't performed here, obviously. So I would like to welcome you all to Georgetown and to thank you for joining us for what promises to be an exciting day of debate and engagement on the art and science of intelligence. So there was a time back in Renaissance Florence when there was little distinction between artists and scientists. So perhaps we've come full circle today. Today's conference follows several years of lively discussion held here at Georgetown under the auspices of the Kalaris Intelligence Studies Fund around key policy challenges facing the intelligence community, such as openness, privacy, secrecy, themselves made more acute by the previously inconceivable technological advances of the internet age. I anticipate that today's conversations will continue the tradition the Fund has helped to build of drawing insights from distinguished members of the private, public, and non-profit sectors regarding some of the foundational issues facing intelligence in the 21st century. I'd like to say a few words of thanks to those individuals who have made this conference possible. First, let me recognize the efforts of my colleague, Professor Keir Lieber, Director of the Security Studies program at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service. Keir and his team have worked tirelessly alongside the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency to plan and organize this event. Partnerships such as these between Georgetown and the NGA are critical to one of the university's defining roles, and frankly, to my job, the creation of new knowledge. For example, in the intelligence context, how can we exploit the opportunities afforded us by that other intelligence currently in vogue, that is AI, to inform and advance the formation and execution of national security policy. We're also, of course, deeply grateful for the generosity of the George T. Kalaris Intelligence Studies Fund in sponsoring today's proceedings. The Kalaris Fund provides stipends for students studying intelligence in the Security Studies program and research support for scholars. And of particular relevance to us today, the fund provides resources that allow us to host fora like this. So we can not only create knowledge, but share it, validate it, and embed it in the policy dialogue. Finally, I want to express my personal appreciation to the distinguished speakers and moderators who will be participating in today's proceedings. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your wisdom and insights. Georgetown is deeply honored to welcome you all to today's event. This meeting and the ideas that it will generate are emblematic of the mission of the School of Foreign Service, which seeks to bring hard data-driven scientific evidence combined with the artistry that transforms knowledge into understanding to bear on the crafting and implementation of security policy. No doubt Leonardo da Vinci would be envious. Thank you again for joining us today as we contemplate and grapple with the issues that will dominate the study and profession of intelligence in the years to come. So, with that, I'd like to introduce the speakers in our first panel today. Robert Cardillo is the 6th Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Mr. Cardillo has led the NGA under the authorities of the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence since October 2014. Robert began his career with the Defense Intelligence Agency in 1983 as an imagery analyst, having that year graduated with a BA in government from Cornell University. Then, in 1988, he earned an MA in National Security Studies from this institution. Robert is the recipient of the Director of National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal, the Presidential Rank of Distinguished Executive, the Presidential Rank of Meritorious Executive, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Joint Meritorious Civilian Service Award. With him will be David Martin. Mr. Martin has been a CBS News national security correspondent covering the Pentagon and the State Department since 1993. In that capacity, he's reported virtually every major defense, intelligence, and international affairs story for the CBS Evening News, as well as for other broadcasts, including 60 Minutes and 48 Hours. He joined CBS News as its Pentagon correspondent in 1983, just as Robert was graduating from Dartmouth, but had begun his career within the network in New York in 1969. In the interim, he worked for Newsweek and the Associated Press. David earned his academic stripes from Yale in 1965 and his real stripes in Vietnam on board a Navy destroyer. Please join me in welcoming Robert Cardillo and David Martin. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm David Martin, and my voice doesn't always sound like this. I hate to begin on a snarky note, but we're here to talk about the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which makes its living analyzing photos. And one of the signs I walked by on the way in here was, "No photos allowed." So we'll have to rely on satellite photos for today. I've been talking to myself about NGA for the past several weeks because I'm in the final phases of doing a piece for 60 Minutes on NGA. So first I was doing research, getting ready for our visit to NGA last month, and then in the last couple weeks I've been writing and rewriting a script. When that piece airs sometime this fall, I'll bet you that most viewers will be hearing about NGA for the first time. You know, other intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, you mention their initials and you immediately know what someone's talking about. You say NGA and you're likely to get a blank stare, and if you say National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the stare is likely to get even blanker. But part of that is because NGA keeps changing its name, and it just hasn't had time to sink in. But I think another reason is that you just haven't had a good old-fashioned scandal. That's the way to make your name in Washington. So before we start, I want to just tell you a few basic facts about NGA. It has 14,500 employees. It has a spectacular headquarters building at Fort Belvoir, south of here. Its mission is to analyze photos taken from space and by airplanes. A lot of what it does is secret. A lot of what it does you can see on their website. And a lot of what it does increasingly is use satellites taken by commercial satellite companies. And that's what is really fundamentally changing the way NGA does business. And that was the reason we are doing this story for 60 Minutes. The working title is Small Satellites, Big Data. So before we get to the changes, I want to begin by asking Bob Cardillo to describe what it was like back in the day, before the rise of commercial satellites. And he is the perfect guy to ask, because he started as a photo analyst straight out of college in 1983. So why don't you tell us what it was like back in the glory days?
In the glory days.
Yeah.
Before I do that, first let me add my thanks to Georgetown, to Kalaris, to you all, to everyone who contributed to this opportunity. We've been here now for a few years, and we've just been very, very pleased to see this grow. And what I mean by this is that the conversation that we're having here, but the one that we'll have in the hall with you all, or that we'll see you later at the recruiting event at the end of the day. And so we're very grateful for this opportunity. Quick fact check correction. Anybody who knows me doesn't call me Bob, okay? So David, you and I are gonna get more closely acquainted. And so it's Robert. So again, for all the fact checkers out there. And for the record too, yes, we've changed our name, but we did it once, okay? Like 15 years ago, 14 years ago. So it's time to get over this.
Still need a scandal.
We don't need a scandal. We're happy to live below the fold. I know we have colleagues who sit up there at that headline level. We're happy to do our job beneath. All that said, to your question, yes, I joined in 1983 blindly. I know that's an odd word to use for a visual agency, but I literally did not know what I was joining. I knew I wanted to serve some way, somehow. That's the family I grew up in. And so I was applying to the intelligence community, but when I got the call and they said we'd be willing to hire you, it was called a GS7 level in those days, for $14,248. All I heard was $14,248 because I couldn't imagine spending that money at all. It was more than I'd ever heard of. But then they said, oh, you're going to be an intelligence research specialist, parentheses, photographic interpreter. So what did that mean? Well, what it meant in 1983 was that predominantly, and remember, 1983 was, we were peaking in the Cold War. President Reagan had been elected 3 years earlier. He'd run on a campaign of strength and rebuilding the nation's defense and confronting the singular threat that we had in those days, which was the Soviet Union. And so as you were welcomed into the business, you get put onto some part of the Soviet account. My account was their mobile signal capability. What that means is we needed to understand better how the Soviets would command and control their forces in a conflict, Warsaw Pact, NATO, or United States and Soviet Union. And given that it was a big country, still is a big country, and given that they had a very large army, we would employ predominantly, almost exclusively in those days, government satellites that were quite unique quite classified. By the way, we're still classified, but very sensitive capability. And that capability provided insight. And that insight added to advantage. And so that the decision makers we served, whether they were in uniform or in a suit, could know more than the adversary, could see further, could understand deeper. And those three things are still our job. We just did it differently in those days. And so many of the satellites that operated in those days worked in a way in which they took literally a capsule of film. I'm getting blank stares. Okay, we used to have cameras, and you'd put film in them. But literally, you would put film in this satellite, and bless the wizards who came up with this. And the satellite would fly in space. It would expose that imagery through a lens. It would then complete the roll of film, and I kid you not, it would eject it out of the satellite. It would then come back down through the atmosphere. It would deploy a parachute, and it would be caught by a plane with a trapeze on the back of it. Sounds nutty. And I think it sounds amazing. That's American ingenuity. We had to give the president access to denied territory. So we did it from space, and we did it in a way that the engineers and the wizards and the imagination could deliver. So I was at the receiving end of those capsules, and I would employ a growing skill set to try to understand what the Soviets and how they were going to command and control their troops.
If you want to see what those early photo satellites looked like, a couple of them are on display in the Air Force Museum of the Air Force Air and Space Museum out in Dayton, Ohio. And if you go on their website, you will see what they look like. So in those days, the government had a monopoly. What happened to the monopoly?
I want to say a good thing happened to the monopoly. What happened was, like many of the technologies that are literally driving our society and our economy, were derived in some form or fashion inside of a government lab or a think tank or a joint academic government partnership. And I mean the internet, and I mean global positioning, and I mean imaging from space. And so while at the time, and I would argue, David, the real monopoly in those days was access to space. You'll recall President Kennedy's charge to the nation in response to the Soviet first access to space with Sputnik, that it became a national focus and a governmental priority to, in that case, move men ultimately to the moon, but to put assets into space. It was a national security imperative. That discovery, all the wizardry that I've referenced, then became available to academics, to commercial companies, to public institutions to apply other benefits from that access to space. And so yes, the barriers to space are dropping because you can now achieve access in a not an easy way, but easier than it was before, and it's created great now commercial opportunities.
When did commercial satellites start going up?
Well, the director of NGA should know the answer to that question. Because I just said that, you know I don't know the answer to that question. What I mean is I don't know the exact year, but I mean, look,
Time period.
Yes, even in the 70s, the NASA was employing not commercial, they were government designed and built, but they were then shared. These would be pretty low resolution, meaning gross imagery, but provided more for environmental scans of the planet, atmospheric conditions, weather, agricultural trends, et cetera. That then evolved. Europeans got involved in the 80s, similarly with those kinds of satellites, but the commercialization, that is to say, can I make money by putting a satellite in orbit, is rather recent. I mean, that's the past 10 years or so, and that's been accelerating. That is to say, the monetization, commercialization of space has been accelerating in the past 2 or 3 years.
It's hard to keep track of all of the commercial satellite companies that are out there because they keep buying each other. But the two that I've focused on in working on this story were Digital Globe, which has 5 satellites in orbit, and a newer organization called Planet Labs, which has more than 150 satellites in orbit. That's compared to just a handful of the high-resolution satellites that he used to rely on when the government had the monopoly. So what do these extra numbers give you?
So remember why we're here, advantage. It's insight, it's assuredness, it's the ability to safely navigate. It's all those things that we provide to the department, to the community, to the government, and to our foreign partners. To do that, the planet is our workspace. And so we have experts with decades of experience in understanding that planet. And I mean elevation, I mean gravity, I mean bathymetry, so even under the sea for maritime navigation. On top of that framework, then, we need to provide, become aware of the human activity and be able to discriminate between human activity, which is normal, commercial, civil, and that which could be a threat. So to your question, to the extent if I can contract with a company like Digital Globe that we have now for 8 years, or with Planet Labs like we have now, we're doing our 3rd contract with them, to give me more access over more areas of the planet and not just spread geographically, but to spread around the clock, because I need to understand the planet around the clock. That's all to my advantage. So everything we do at NGA is about making sure we're accessing all of that we can to employ as much knowledge, expertise against or to gain the insight that we owe our customer.
So how dependent have you become on commercial satellite pictures?
It's not, well, look, we're dependent in the sense that we drive a majority of our mapping and charting and geodetic mission set. What that means is all the maps, all the safety of air navigation responsibilities we have are predominantly derived from that commercial source. 2 reasons for that. 1, it's available at a cost that the government believes it's a good use of taxpayer dollars. And 2, because the source is unclassified from the beginning, and I need to hand you a map that you can take into that cockpit or onto that bridge that's unclassified, you can imagine that's a simpler, more straightforward process. Doesn't mean we can't use classified information to derive unclassified output. We do that as well. But I would say that we have been very pleased with the growth of that industry so that I could continue to provide that kind of service, which is if you're a navigator in any domain, you can count on NGA to make sure you have the latest, say, flight plan, safety of maritime navigation information, vertical obstructions, anything that would be of interest to you to make sure whatever you're in conveys safely from one place to the next.
Anybody can go on a website like 38 North, which covers developments in North Korea, and you can see the use that these unclassified photos are put to. And it's really quite amazing what somebody who knows how to analyze a photo can tell from looking at one of these photos that looks to a lot of us just like an abstract painting. But the one thing I came to understand while working on this story is it's not about that one killer photograph that catches somebody in the act of doing something that might be a threat to the United States. It's about changes between today's photo and yesterday's photo and the photo the day before. And the title of this conference is the art and science of intelligence. The science is taking the pictures. Explain some of the art of analyzing those photos.
Thank you, because if anything, even though I've been in this business a long time, during my tenure as director, because of the way that we've more aggressively engaged with the kind of commercial opportunities and the more that we've invested in data science and computer computer visioning of late, some people believe that we don't need liberal arts majors anymore. Cardillo should not apply next time to NGA. Nothing could be further from the truth, because remember, our ultimate value proposition is advantage. We can't derive that advantage unless we have intellectually curious, analytically driven, methodologically sound analysts who will be enabled and empowered by the proper application of data science and the discovery that a computer vision tool can do over a gross amount of area. But remember that, yes, our business is to know the earth, but our business is really to understand human intention. And the only way you get at that is when you use humans to infer future activity of other humans. It's an innately human activity. So, yes, we're pushing hard, we're recruiting hard to increase our data science component and our skill set on our staff. But we have not let up to ensure that we've got the right number, the right balance of those people that can drive that data science to help us understand that human intent.
So in about 5 minutes, we're going to go to questions from the audience. So start thinking now. So the catch in all these commercial satellite photos is just the sheer quantity of them. Planet Labs, their 150 satellites take 1.5 million pictures a day, day after day after day. Since they've had satellites in orbit, they've taken a total of 730 million pictures, and that was last week. It's gone up since then. This brings new meaning to the term binge watching. So how do you handle a tsunami of data like that?
So that is exactly why we're engaging with, we're recruiting more on that data science side. Because look, in my era, quite literally, if an image arrived at our agency, either a human exploited it or it didn't get exploited. It went into the library and you might go get it later, but it had to have eyes through a microscope onto a table, and somebody had to write something down saying, this is what I saw. We can't keep up that way with that kind of volume. We did some math last GeoInt conference, 6 million imagery analysts to keep up with the kind of flow. And as exciting as that number is to me, okay, as a director of NGA, it's not very exciting as a U.S. taxpayer, because it's not an affordable solution, nor is it an efficient solution. So what we're doing is we're trying to combine the best of both. That is to say, computers, algorithms, applications are getting better at detecting the change that you talked about earlier. What was here yesterday, what's not here today. simple things like buildings, roads, rail, vehicles, etc. As the computer gets better at that, it can help us to understand where there are changes, and not just from day to day, but in what we call patterns of life. So, hostile threat, adversarial capability that we seek to understand, employment of a missile system. It isn't just about that missile, it's about everything that's around it. It's about how it works and how it's managed and how it's operated. And so what the computer can do is can help us filter, detect the change, and cue the human then, because that's my expert. That's that intellectually curious, analytically driven person to the right point in time so that they can employ the gray matter and answer the really important question is, what does it mean?
To give you a specific example, when we were at Planet Labs, they have an algorithm that detects roads. And they could use that algorithm to find any new road in Syria. And it happens just in a few seconds. And the computer shows you on the screen where there's this new grid of roads, and it can show you where new buildings are going up. And then a human analyst can immediately identify that as a new refugee camp. So one more question before we go to the audience. One big change is the loss of the monopoly, the rise of commercial satellite companies. The other big change is the change in targets. It used to be all about the Soviet Union, and the fall of the Soviet Union and then 9/11 changed all that. So how has that changed your business?
Completely. Again, my era was singularly focused, and when you have a singular target, you build a singular process to seek to understand it. The agency, the world, and we reflect that, now has all of the things you describe. I would add some more, David. We're very proud at NGA of our ability and our experience with contributing to recovery from natural disasters, or responding to hurricanes, or to medical crises like Ebola in Africa. We just released within the past month a new, never before rendition map of Antarctica. And it's posted on our website, and it's provided for public consumption. The reason we do that is to, one, we had the capacity, so we had, it wasn't a lot of extra work for us to do that, but two, we're able now to contribute a baseline understanding of a place that had very little, scientific understanding, environmental, climatology, all of those things now can be advanced because we've given them a better frame of reference. To your point about moving from the Soviet Union to Russia to China to Syria, yes, our work and our workforce is now spread more broadly, and we're quite proud of that coverage we're able to provide, but we also realize that whatever we're talking about today will change as quickly, if not more quickly, tomorrow. And so much of what we focus on today is agility. How quickly can we move assets? How quickly can we move our attention to create insight and understanding to that evolving issue? The world is just, as this room well knows, more dynamic than it's ever been before.
All right, is that 5 minutes to questions or 5 minutes left? 5 minutes left. All right, do we have any questions in the audience? I see one right there. Yeah.
NGA has been on the forefront of innovation for a long time, so you've had to defend these innovations to policymakers and whatnot. And oftentimes, an image is a little bit more concrete, so you're able to show something. But how would you apply lessons learned to when the product is less or a little more abstract, as opposed to being able to show an image, something, especially with what AI is doing now, where you don't know the process or exactly how a conclusion came about?
Boy, it's a great question, and it's difficult to answer briefly. I'll do my best. You've heard we're investigating all of these capabilities that are flourishing throughout this country and the world to create advantage. We are also being more mindful that it has become more difficult to have coherent, connected conversations about the veracity of information, the pedigree of the information. Those good old days in 1983, if you were my customer and we're in a top secret room somewhere, I hand you a picture, there's no question about where it came from, who handled it, who controlled it, et cetera. We spend a lot more time now on that because as much as I am appreciative of these commercial companies that we contract with, I then have to make sure that it was handled properly. And so we do spend a lot of time on this, and we will spend more. And I won't get into it now because it's quite complicated, but when you get into artificial intelligence, it gets even more complicated because then we call it understandable AI. You have to be able to explain it because my job is to give you confidence. If I give you something that you're not sure where it came from, I'm not sure I'm going to make you more confident.
In the back there.
Director Cardillo, thanks for coming. My question is about two domains that we hear a lot about in the news cycle, particularly cyber and space. And I think we can all see the immense value that NGA has to offer to other domains where you're taking and analyzing pictures of things that are on the Earth's surface. But I was wondering if you could comment on what you see as NGA's role in providing intelligence on national security issues that relate to cyber issues or issues in space.
Yeah,
thanks.
I can, but I'll be pretty general, which means, look, I've spoken about land, I've spoken about sea, and I've spoken about air. We have the same responsibility for space. Okay, that is to say, awareness, risk, threat, opportunity, et cetera. So that's an evolving domain that we need to get better at doing that part of our job. On cyber, yes, it's cyberspace, and yes, it's digital, but everything in cyberspace resolves to some place geographically. Now, that doesn't always give you the insight that is necessary, but again, I go back to the frame of reference. It then is a better frame to either seek to further understand, to explore, to comprehend what that digital event means. So again, support, framework, reference point for the next level of our partner or our customer to do their job with.
So we have unfortunately run out of time. I want to thank my good friend Robert Cardillo, and thank you all for listening. And I guess you're having a recruiting session here later.
We're here all day, all night. Well, maybe not all night, but we'll see. But no, I'm looking forward to spending the day here and to participating in the recruitment fair at the end of the day. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.